So it turns out this thing is actually pretty alright. So I had received the Virtual Boy headset last week. I made a video about that and tested it with a couple of Switch 1 VR games. But the Virtual Boy games themselves didn't become available until this week. So now that they're here, I figured, let's try them all and let's rank them, even though I've only had like a few minutes with each of them. So these are like very early rankings for all these titles, but I just thought, it's probably fun. And if you're thinking of getting the Virtual Boy headset for whatever reason, like here is my opinion on where you should start. So there's 7 games right now in the Virtual Boy library on NSO. I believe there's going to be 16 or 15 by the end of the rollout. But yeah, I'm just ranking the launch lineup, and let's start with number 7, which is Golf. So Golf is like a pretty basic game that I'm really not super interested in. I think golf games in general, for me, I would only really be interested in them if they're like whimsy and wacky, like Mario Golf or something. This is a very much a simulation sort of type golf game. It's very, straightforward, very simple. You got the courses, and then when you go to hit the ball, you have to choose like the strength, the club you're using, where you're going to hit the ball. Like it's actually quite tough because the impact point moves very quickly, and you have to press A quickly enough to hit the ball where you want it to be hit. So it's a little tough there, and you can change your stance. So I think that kind of influences the curve of your ball and stuff like that. And that's interesting. There's enough to it there to be like a compelling, I guess, golf game at the time. But it's not really anything groundbreaking. I think if you want to play a golf game that's more simulation based, why would you not just play something more modern that has a lot more features and more ways to make it feel realistic than this does? So I don't think there's anything super interesting here, and I think the biggest problem is that because of the graphics of the Virtual Boy, everything being red, it's really hard to tell the different types of materials, the fairway, the green, the rough, the bunker. Like all of that stuff is a little hard to tell apart, and more importantly, like in the distance, it's really hard to tell where things actually are. Like you can't really see slopes on the course very well. It's really hard to tell if you're going like downhill or uphill or something like that. So like those little differences are hard to tell. I found the controls a little hard to get to grips with like especially measuring the force of your shot. Like it felt like my shots were always way too strong, so that kind of sucked. But yeah, this is not a favorite of mine for sure. I would not really recommend this. Next up in the ranking at position number 6, I have 3D Tetris, and I admit right off the bat that this is very much influenced by the fact that I don't care about Tetris that much in general. I'm not a huge fan of the gameplay. 3D Tetris is an interesting take on it though, because I don't think it's really been done again. So in 3D Tetris, I believe everyone's familiar with like the standard Tetris. So in 3D Tetris, you look at the field like from the top. It's a top-down view of your playing field. So, and instead of the blocks, usually it's a two-dimensional thing, right? You have the 2 dimensions. But here everything's 3-dimensional, so the bottom layer isn't a line, it's a plane. So you have to fill up that plane in order to destroy the blocks on it. So that's pretty much it. The Tetris pieces come in some weird shapes because they have to be 3D themselves. And there's an interesting twist there. Like I think it being 3D is interesting, and it's kind of odd that they haven't really done something like this again, as far as I know. But I don't really care for Tetris. I think the easiest levels in 3D Tetris are way too slow and boring to get through. If you go for the harder levels, the blocks do fall a bit faster, and it makes it a little more interesting. But overall, like I don't find this gameplay very compelling, and it being in 3D, the perspective's a little confusing. It's kind of weird. You can't fully control the 3D perspective, so you don't really know where things are. Yeah, it's just not amazing. My wife loves Tetris though, and she found it interesting. So if you do like Tetris, I guess give it a shot, but definitely not for me. Next up at position number 5 is Red Alarm. Red Alarm is a sort of on-rails shooter. I would compare it to most of Star Fox. And it's sort of interesting because not only is it 3D in terms of like the depth and perspective and the main selling point of the Virtual Boy, being a 3D sort of headset, but it tries to have some 3D rendering, and it's weird because the Virtual Boy couldn't really do a lot of 3D rendering. So what happens here is that for things that are polygonal, you have the structures of the polygons, you have the wireframes, but there's no textures to anything. Everything is like transparent. And you would think this makes the game very hard to read, but I actually thought it was fine. Like, I only played the first stage, but I did totally fine in it. Like, I had fun. I didn't feel that it was overly confusing or anything like that. I could see through things, but the levels are never designed to be really confusing with overlapping things. I think the main situation you'll run into, at least from what I've played, is that there will be walls sometimes in the middle of the hallway, and you can see through the walls because there is no texture to them. So like you'll have enemies that are hiding behind walls, but you can see them. And then if you try to shoot them, you're not gonna hit them, and it's kind of weird, I guess, but it's like you can tell what's happening as soon as you try to shoot them, right? Like there's something in front of you. It doesn't take very long for you to be aware that the walls, are kind of transparent. So you just kind of have to work with that a little bit. But I don't think the game is unintelligible. I think it's totally fine. I initially had a lot of trouble against the boss fight at the end of the first stage, but then I figured out you can actually shoot the missiles, it shoots at you and destroy them. That made the boss fight way easier. So yeah, this is a fine game. I feel like if you're doing like Star Fox, this is interesting enough to give it a shot. I don't think this is a bad game, but personally I don't care that much for Star Fox as a formula. So this is not a game that's really for me. But I don't think it's poorly executed really. Next up, right at the middle of our table, is Tango Boxer. And this one is another one that's only not higher, probably because of how much I suck at it. Tango Boxer is like a fighting game that I've seen compared to Punch-Out. I've barely played Punch-Out, so I don't want to draw too many parallels. I have tried it a little bit though, and I see the similarities. So it's a fighting game, but it really is just about looking at your opponent, seeing what type of attack they're going to do, blocking it or dodging it, and when they attack you, they usually expose a weak point of their own, and so then you have the opportunity to strike back. So protect, attack, and it's just like a back and forth. It's almost like a puzzle game, but contextualized as a fighting game. It's not too hard conceptually, but I found this very difficult to actually do. I got to the second stage and I tried it 10 times or more, and I could not win the second fight. I think part of it may be the fact that, the Virtual Boy, it had 2 D-pads, so it was all buttons. And the D-pads here are mapped to the analog sticks, and usually that works fine, but each analog stick controls one of your fists, and then you have to use the buttons to actually punch. And it's okay. I don't think it's the fault of the controls necessarily, but my brain doesn't register very well what's going on with using one analog stick to raise or lower my arm and the other analog stick to also raise and lower an arm. I don't know, my brain couldn't process that information fast enough. I feel like if I had 2 D-pads for this, that would probably work better, but I don't know for sure. But yeah, I couldn't really get to grips with this. I couldn't react fast enough to what the enemy was doing. But conceptually, this is a pretty fun looking game. I would recommend trying it, especially if you've played Punch-Out before. I think this will be in that ballpark. I just couldn't really get to grips with it very well. And finally, we get to our podium. Where do we start? At number 3, I'm gonna say Innsmouth no Yakata. I might be pronouncing that very wrong. I don't know Japanese. This was a Japan exclusive game, and it's actually surprising when I looked this up. It's based on a novel by H.P. Lovecraft, at least in terms of the context of the game. It's based on a novel called The Shadow over Innsmouth, I believe is how it's called, what it's called. And it's actually a pretty interesting looking game. So it's a first-person shooter that, in terms of how it controls, it reminds me kind of a dungeon crawler like Etrian Odyssey, where movement is grid-based and in first person, so you can take a step forward, take a step back, or you can turn sideways, and then you have to turn before taking another step. It's not a turn-based movement like it is in a dungeon crawler. You can move at will, but it is grid-based, so one step forward is very clearly one grid forward in your movement. So it's very interesting. It's a little strange for a first-person shooter. That's kind of horror theme a little bit, But honestly, it seems like it would be pretty fun. So the goal is you have multiple floors in this mansion, and the goal is to get out of each floor and onto the next one under the time limit that you're given, while also either avoiding or defeating some of the enemies that appear. And you have a gun, you can shoot the enemies, or you can just avoid them if you're able to back out of where you are. You can avoid the enemies too, because you don't get a whole lot of ammo to defeat the enemies, so that can be a little difficult. But yeah, you have to strategize, and you have to memorize a lot. That's the thing, like the whole game is very basic looking in terms of the places where you are. Everything looks the same, so if you want to get out of a place in time, and if you want to collect things especially, like there's some collectibles I think, as far as I can tell, if you want to get them, you have to be very efficient with your time and move quickly and collect all the items and figure out where you're going. But because there aren't really a lot of visual landmarks, it's hard to memorize where you've been and where you haven't been. So it can take a while to really get used to it and figure everything out. But I feel like it would be a fun thing to do. Like if you have free time and if you're looking for something a little unique, this is a pretty interesting experience that I would recommend trying out. Like it's a pretty fun concept, and it looks like there's plenty of content too, because like the paths start to split after like the second level, and you have like a whole bunch of combinations you can do. There's only 3 endings as far as I can tell. Like they show you the whole map for the game, and I think there's only 3 endings. So there's not a ton of different endings to unlock, but it is cool. You can try all these different paths, go in different directions to play all the different floors of the game. So it looks like it's a pretty meaty game. And they give you passwords to save your progress that you can enter. So if you want to visit a specific level, you can just write down the passwords or just look them up. But yeah, like this game looks pretty cool. Like I didn't make it very far yet. I didn't have a lot of time, and I don't know if I have the patience to really go through with all of it and experience all of it. But I feel like if you do have a little bit of that desire to explore and learn these levels, this would be a very fun game to play actually. At number 2 for our podium, we have Galactic Pinball, which I feel like I'm probably gonna be one of the few people to rank it that high. I just really like pinball as a concept. I always have. I think it's probably because I grew up with like the Space Cadet pinball on Windows XP. Like that was a huge childhood memory for me. So I just love pinball in general. And Galactic Pinball honestly looks kind of cool. So like there's like 4 or 5 tables you can play on. And I mean, obviously the visuals are all red. So like the visuals aren't super interesting because everything looks the same color. But it's still kind of cool, like the tables do look different. I've only played 2 so far, so I can't say like all of them are super different, but there's different gimmicks. I know one of the tables, for example, you actually have 3 flippers. You have the 2 at the bottom and 1 up further up, but the other one only has the 2 at the bottom. So like there's, they're quite different in how they behave. And then there's of course special events that you can trigger, and sometimes they're pretty interesting. I think it's also a cool showcase of just like the 3D graphics, because they do a lot of like just fun animations with like the 3D effect in your face. It's kind of cool just to look at in that sense. But there's also some interesting stuff. There was one that caught me off guard and that I couldn't even control very well, which is like you have to shoot comets. Like you trigger this special event and then comets start flying at your pinball table. I don't think you lose anything for them hitting that pinball table, but if you manage to shoot them, you get extra points. So you have to shoot them before they hit the table. And that's kind of cool. I kind of hate how they have inverse controls for aiming vertically. I never get well with that when they do that, and you can't really change it, so that kind of sucks. But conceptually, and once you get used to it, it's kind of fun to do. Like it's a cool twist to have in the pinball table, to be able to just like, I don't know, just shooting things for a little bit. It's kind of cool. I had fun. I like pinball, so like that's like really the main reason why I like these games. Like pinball games in general, I find them fun. And there's a variety here where like, yeah, I'd like to play this every now and then, and I think the 3D effect just makes the whole thing feel kind of, it's a cool experience to have every now and then. It's like going to an arcade. Like you don't do that all the time. It's not the best thing in the world, but when you're there, like, yeah, you want to take advantage of it, right? So to have this sort of 3D experience is one of those like, yeah, I'll do this every now and then. It sounds like a fun thing to do. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. I like Galactic Pinball. And finally, at number 1, to the surprise of no one, Virtual Boy Wario Land. Yes, this is an actual video game from an actual franchise that we know. So Wario Land, at this point, there's actually only the first Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3. That was the only one that was out at this point. This is actually the second Wario Land game. And I've only played a couple of stages so far, so I can't comment on like the whole thing yet. But I actually really like it. So because the first one was on the Game Boy and is so rudimentary in terms of the visuals, this is actually a pretty big step up. Obviously, you don't have colors or anything like you have later on in the series, starting with Wario Land 3. But you do have that sense of 3D that, obviously the Virtual Boy can do. And they have this thing where like a lot of enemies even go back and forth between the different planes of 3D, and you can kind of see when they're able to hurt you and when they're not. And this is actually really cool because it's a concept that I didn't realize until I heard someone, Scott the Wasp, talk about this a long time ago, where, Mutant Mudds, which is a 3DS game that I played back in the day when it came out, and I enjoyed it so much. I really loved that game. Mutant Mudds took a lot of ideas from this, like the idea of switching between the foreground and the background. And interestingly, in Mutant Mudds, you actually had levels that were entirely red and black, which at the time I did not know why it was that way. And now I realize like it is really just an homage to the Virtual Boy and Wario Land, because this is where that comes from. Like you have the foreground and background, you have the whole red aesthetic, of course. But it's cool. Also, there's like a lot of animation to this because, coming off of the Game Boy to something that was more like a home console at the time, it was a lot more powerful. Like the animations are way smoother. There's like a bit of 3D rendering for some of the things in the levels, like the blocks and stuff. They have a feeling of like depth and structure, I guess, to them. It's kind of cool. Yeah, so like so far I really enjoyed what I've played of Wario Land. And of course, there's also secrets that you can find in each level. Like the essence of Wario Land is here, and it's just a much more evolved form compared, to the first one in terms of the animation and everything. So like I really enjoy it so far, and because it is a series that I already know and love, I am very excited to play this one and actually complete it and see it through to the end. It also just seems like the more fleshed out one. Like there's a proper intro to the game. You can kind of tell what's happening. Yeah, it's probably the most fleshed out game in the Virtual Boy library so far. And I enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. So yeah, that's my ranking of the Virtual Boy games so far. Again, there's a lot more coming. I don't know if I'll rank all of them in the future. Maybe if I keep following this very closely, I could just do an updated video with all of the Virtual Boy games. But yeah, these are actually kind of interesting. And, I'm not here to say like, oh, you should get the Virtual Boy. Like, obviously, I'm kind of crazy. Like, this is a console that failed miserably for a reason. So I'm not gonna say like, yeah, everyone should buy the Virtual Boy. But if you are like a weirdo like me who likes all this Nintendo stuff, like the Nintendo Legacy, I don't think the Virtual Boy games are actually terrible. Like a lot of these, they have merits to them. They're like fine to play. Even the lower ones in this list, like they're mechanically sound. It's just not a kind of gameplay that I care about that much. So I would recommend checking this out if you have that sort of curiosity like I do. They're not terrible games, and the experience as a whole is not bad. I do think my eyes don't work super well with the Virtual Boy. Like the Virtual Boy app, and like the VR games that I talked about last week, the Virtual Boy app does have a lot of settings to try and make things more comfortable. You can adjust the interpupillary distance of your eyes, so it helps align the 3D effect a bit better for different people. And I try to mess with that to make it a little more comfortable and to like maybe make it a little sharper. It can help too, like if you get the right distance, it can make the image look a little bit sharper. But like I can't get like everything perfect. I always have this feeling that there's a bit more blurriness at the edges of the image. So like maybe that's just me. I can't really speak for everyone with that. But it works well enough because the Virtual Boy games are actually displayed in a bit of a smaller window compared to like the actual VR games I talked about last week. They're still fully visible. Everything is like perceptible. You can just change the sliders back and forth for different games if it makes a difference. Like you can just keep changing it as you need. You can adjust the size of the games as well. So that's really cool. They didn't make enough stuff here so that it works well in 3D and for different people. You know, for me it's not perfect, but I think that might be like something that varies a lot person to person. So it's something that you might have just try it for yourself. But yeah, like I enjoyed this experience. I am looking forward to what else is coming to the Virtual Boy NSO. And I'm probably going to be playing a few of these games this week while I wait for Resident Evil to come out at the end of the week. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. These games are actually not bad. If you have the Virtual Boy, now you know where to start. That's about it. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.